Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel, and today is the day the Champion Cell Alpha is now out for Call of Duty Vanguard. Unfortunately, it's only available for PlayStation users, not Xbox, not PC. You guys will not have access to this whatsoever, which is frustrating as a PC player, but I do have an old relic of a PlayStation 4 that sounds like a gen engine that gets turned on 2 or 3 times a year every time they do the Call of Duty Alpha and Betas, because typically there's going to be some PlayStation exclusivity. You guys know Activision, there's always some fuckery to be had. So, how is the game? This is going to be my honest first impressions of the game. Keep in mind, these are impressions. It's not a full review of the alpha or even the full game, because this does not represent in any way the entirety of the game. We still have this alpha, then we have the quote-unquote open beta that's going to be coming, where fans can play the actual multiplayer, and of course, on September 7th, we are going to have the full reveal of the multiplayer for Call of Duty Vanguard. What we have right here is basically just a little bit of a teaser. It's a new mode that they're trying out that so far people seem to be enjoying. I'll be discussing that further later on in the video. And of course, we get our first look at some of the perks. We have our first look at the weapons themselves, the attachments, how they're going to work, as well as just how the game feels in general. So let's go ahead and discuss my first impressions now that I have a few hours with the game. But keep in mind, these are impressions, and once again, everything is subject to change. How the alpha is subject to change. It could be a completely different game tomorrow compared to the game that we played today, just by them twisting a few knobs and making a couple of balance changes. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. First things first, do I think the game is good? So far, I enjoy it. I mean, obviously, very early first impressions. It's a side game mode. This is like the, what was it? The gunfight alpha that we had for Modern Warfare 2019. It's like that, right? It gives you a very, very small glimpse into what the game is actually going to be like. But after having played it, I have a list here in front of me that I wrote down of a number of pros and cons. And number one, I like the look and the feel of the weapons. Recoil is back on the menu, ladies and gentlemen. Like, you don't get melted in this game. Gunfights are actually gunfights, and it actually requires a good amount of skill, because even as you level up your weapon and spend cash to unlock a bunch of different attachments, these guns still kick pretty good compared to what we saw back in Black Ops Cold War or even Modern Warfare 2019. Like, recoil is actually a thing. Long-range gunfights are actually somewhat difficult. They require gun skill, and it requires a bit of getting used to. And the time to kill, which was definitely something that I was concerned about, the time to kill is not as fast as Modern Warfare 2019, which is also a benefit. Now, some of you may be wondering if that's due to the armor system. So this game mode that we're playing here, Champions Hill, it does have an armor system, which is indicated down there in the bottom right. It's not really a good spot to have it, because look at the menus. It just, everything kind of like overlaps down there. They definitely need to work the UI out a little bit. But the armor is similar to Warzone, and when you have full armor, obviously the time to kill is going to be a lot slower. But even when you don't have armor, or even when your opponent does not have armor, the time to kill still feels pretty good based on what we've played so far. We also have a good variety of weapons that are available to us here. We have things like the Tommy gun, the MP40, the Kar 98K, the MG42, the bar. We have a couple of different pistols. The Mosin Nagant is in here. I think the Kar 98K is in there as well. It's cool to see all these weapons, and I think that's going to be what keeps me playing the alpha, because the game mode itself, Champions Hill, I do think is actually a pretty neat idea. Again, I'll be discussing that later, but I think what's going to keep me playing, because it's an alpha, when you level up, like nothing carries over, nothing matters, you know, you're not leveling up or unlocking anything, so you're just basically playing it for fun. And what's going to keep me playing this is trying to mess around with all the different weapons. So far, I really like the Tommy gun, I like the MP40, I like the STG-44. Not a fan of the bar so far. The MG42 seems to kick a lot less, but at the same time, it's like that gun seems to be a pea shooter based on the limited experience I have with the MG42. Maybe I'm wrong. The snipers, the Mosin Nagant, which is a gun, I actually own the Mosin Nagant in real life. Like, it's a really cool gun. It aims down sight very slow. The optical sight that I had was not exactly a great one, and yeah, so sniping definitely feels a lot harder in this game compared to Black Ops Cold War, which you guys know that's one of my biggest gripes with that game, is how fast they aim down sight and how they have no flinch whatsoever, and therefore there's no way to counter them, which is why they're banned in every form of competitive play, and people still defend them as if like they're balanced in Cold War. I'm not getting into it. The sniper community always gets triggered when I say that these are the most busted snipers in COD history. But the ones we see here in Vanguard, as compared to Cold War, seem a bit more difficult to use. I'm sure I'm going to be proven wrong about that in the future, but for right now, they seem okay. I will say another pro is that leaning and blind fire have not been a massive issue so far, but of course, that is subject to change. The game mode itself can be inherently inherently campy. So in Champions Hill, which I think is actually a pretty fun idea, you have a limited number of lives, and you face off against another team. There are, was it 8 teams of 2, I think you have in there, and you face off against another team. Every time you die, you lose one of your lives, and when you run out of lives, you're done. You're kicked out of the game, essentially. You're no longer part of the tournament, essentially, is what it is. And as a result, when people get low on lives, or even when they're high on lives, people decide to camp around a little bit. Maybe they'll be hiding behind a barrel. Maybe they'll be doing this, that, or the other thing. But in my experience so far, leaning has not been a massive problem. I have experienced the leaning where you can lean and you can move around while leaning and hide behind cover, and I have tried blind firing, not at anybody, but when we eliminated a team very early on, I would just sit there and just mess around with the game mechanics. I don't know. So far, they don't seem like a massive issue. I've always said, though, like, what's even the point, right? What is the point of having things like leaning and moving while leaning and blind fire even in your game? Some could argue that it's adding more to the multiplayer experience, that adds more pieces to the puzzle, which will make games feel more dynamic and alive and not be the same thing every single time, because it gives players more options to do more things. But they don't help the game, is what I'm saying. Like, Call of Duty is not meant to be like Gears of War or like Rainbow Six or something like that. It's an arcade shooter. It's meant to be run and gun and fun and whatever, you know. And I feel as though mechanics like leaning and blind firing around cover and stuff like that take away from the Call of Duty experience as compared to adding to the Call of Duty experience. But so far, in my limited experience with the alpha here, it hasn't been a massive issue, but again, I'm sure that is going to change. Now, the footsteps. This is something I've also been pretty concerned about. I'm going to put this as a pro, but at the same time, it could potentially become a con. So by default, footsteps are pretty silent here in this alpha. Like, you can't hear somebody, really. I mean, maybe I'm just not, my ears haven't, like, adjusted to this game yet, but you can't really hear anybody until they're, like, 5 feet away from you. And that is good, because it's kind of like having dead silence almost built in. But again, when you're within those 5 feet and somebody's not moving in a game mode that's kind of inherently meant for you not to move that much, then that's going to be a problem, just like back in Modern Warfare 2019, because the person not moving is rewarded as compared to the person who is moving, who is punished, right? So I feel so right now, so far, it's a pro because it's silent by default, and it's only a big deal when you're within 5 feet, but I feel like that's going to become a con eventually, because I feel as though that is going to be the justification that Sledgehammer and members of the community here are going to have for not making dead silence a perk. I feel as though people are going to say, well, the footsteps are pretty quiet by default, you know, it's fine. I mean, sure, they're not quiet when you're close to somebody, but they're kind of quiet by default, therefore we don't need a dead silence perk, we'll just keep it as a field upgrade. No. Dead silence needs to be a perk. I don't care how silent the footsteps are by default. Make it a perk. I'll run it all day, every day. And I'm sure the vast majority of the S&D community or people that like to play free-for-all and stuff like that, like those people are going to agree dead silence should be a perk. The footsteps are nice now, but make dead silence a perk because, again, when you're within that 5 to 10 foot radius where you actually can hear somebody, the person not moving is rewarded and the person who is moving is punished. We don't want that. That is bad game design. But to quickly cover on Champions Hill here, because I keep mentioning it, I think it's actually a pretty fun and pretty chill mode. I mean, obviously it can get competitive once you get towards the end of the game, which is just something that makes it that much more interesting. I think it's a nice laid-back mode that you can just mess around with, maybe play with your buddies or whatever. I feel as though it is a good game mode. It takes gunfight and makes it a lot more interesting, and I actually like the overall atmosphere that Champions Hill has. Like, for example, when you are playing, right, you hear gunshots and stuff like that, they're happening to your left, and those aren't people in your particular match. Those are people off in the other arena right next to you who are fighting. That's another team to your left over there fighting over there that aren't even part of like the engagement that you and your team are having against the opposing team. I like that. The destructible environments are definitely a con. I'll be discussing that here in a second, but the destructible environments are kind of cool because when you destroy, for example, the airplanes on the airstrip part of the map, when one team does that and like destroys like all the plank wood, that's just kind of gone permanently, or at least it seems that way. So if that is the case, that's kind of a cool feature. Like stuff that happens early on from another team can affect you and your team later on as you get to that particular map in Champions Hill. It's a neat idea. It's definitely a lot more interesting than Gunfight or 2v2 or 3v3 or whatever. So it takes an old idea, like Gunfight, which is kind of weird to say that Gunfight and 3v3 are an old idea, but it takes that idea and makes it a lot more interesting and a lot more fun, at least in my own personal opinion. So with the pros out of the way, those are mostly all the pros I can think of as of right now, just having played the game for a little bit. Time to get to the cons. The destructible environments are stupid. I just said that it's kind of cool how one thing that happens early in the game can affect other teams later on in the game. That part is sort of interesting because it's new to the franchise, but in general, like the destructible environments are kind of ridiculous. Like for example, when you have like a big wooden wall in front of you, they don't work properly. One, you can run right through them if you want to. Any gun can make holes in any bit of cover, and the cover itself, because it's meant to be blown up, it doesn't even properly work. Like, it will not protect you from grenades, and oftentimes it'll show like the enemy's name when they're behind the wall. And this is something I'm benefiting from. Like, I'll be aiming, knowing they're inside that building somewhere, and their name, or like that red text, will show up through the wall because the wall is meant to be destroyed. So I'm like, oh, there you are. I'll shoot you through this cover, which basically doesn't exist, and I just kill them. You know? And again, that's benefiting me because I'm the one doing the shooting, but at the same time, I feel as though they need, if they're going to keep the destructible environments the way they are currently, then they're going to need to adjust them so that people's names aren't showing up through them. You know, that's just kind of a problem. And I also feel as though this is going to fundamentally change up the Call of Duty multiplayer experience, because if the multiplayer maps are anything like the little mini maps here that we see on Champions Hill, then everything is just going to be pure chaos. Like, eventually, the entire map is built to be destroyed, essentially, and by the end of the game, like, if we're having a competitive game of hardpoint or domination or whatever, I'm worried that the maps are just going to be skeletons of their former selves by the end of that match, as every wall and every door and every piece of furniture eventually gets destroyed by people throwing stuns and grenades and shooting their guns and just running. You can just run through walls in this game. It's weird, it's silly. Like, on one hand, you could argue that it's like anti-camper because there's like no walls whatsoever, but when there's no set environment in the game for you to actually interact with, then what's even the point? We might as well just play, go back to Wasteland on Modern Warfare 2 and just get rid of the buildings, get rid of the cave, and just play in an open field, because that's eventually what the maps devolve to. Now, there are some bits of cover that cannot be destroyed, like, for example, vehicles can be blown up, but they stay there. Barrels stay there and stuff like that. But whenever you see like plywood or like sheet metal and stuff, that stuff can be destroyed. And towards the end of the game, even here on Champions Hill, it gets pretty bare bones. Like, the map kind of becomes a skeleton, it seems. So I guess we'll have to wait for the full multiplayer reveal on September 7th to get an idea of what the actual destructible environments are going to be like for normal multiplayer. But here in Champions Hill, I am not a fan of it personally, and I hope that some changes are made and that the multiplayer maps don't rely so much on destructible environments as the Champions Hill maps appear to. Now, earlier I mentioned the minimap. That's definitely a con. The minimap is stupid. The minimap is just like Modern Warfare 2019. They could be shooting an unsuppressed STG-44 or an MG-42 or a bar or whatever, and they don't show up on the map. You have to listen for the sound of the gunshots, which is, you could argue, something that is skill-based, but it's also kind of annoying because one of the pros I mentioned, the fact you can hear the other teams fighting in their own arenas, well, when that's happening, it's kind of difficult sometimes to pinpoint where the STG-44 is being shot in your arena when you have all the other ambient noise actually happening, and the gun's not showing up on the minimap. Like, I would say this, like, Call of Duty is meant to have a proper minimap. When they got rid of the minimap in Modern Warfare 2019, that turned off a lot of fans. Call of Duty's meant to be an arcade shooter. Sure, you could argue it takes more skill, this, that, or the other thing, but you get rid of the minimap, you might as well get rid of Dead Silence as well. You might as well get rid of this, might as well get rid of that, and eventually just make the game Modern Warfare 2019. We don't need it to be like that. Any poll that you've seen online that is voting on whether or not the minimap should return to normal is overwhelmingly in favor of the classic minimap. I don't like the minimap that we have here within Call of Duty Vanguard. Another thing I really dislike is the health regeneration. Now, we've had 3 straight years, if you think back to Black Ops 4, Modern Warfare 2019, as well as Black Ops Cold War, where stim shot was essentially a thing. It's kind of something that has been trained into the minds of lots of Call of Duty fans all around the world. And while we don't have the equivalent of a stim shot here in the alpha, which is okay, I suppose, the health regeneration is painfully slow, and they do that Modern Warfare thing. Again, they keep adding all these ideas from Modern Warfare. When you get shot, suddenly, like, you lose all saturation. Like, it's suddenly like you're concussed. Like, I wonder if it's supposed to make the game feel more gritty and down to earth and realistic or whatever, but you get shot, you have to go hide behind cover and then wait, like, seemingly 5 to 10 seconds for your health to even begin to start regenerating, and it's very frustrating. You can't hear, like, it sucks to get shot in this game. Like, it's not fun. I mean, obviously dying is never fun, but like, when you win a gunfight, you almost wish you didn't, because you're like, oh god, I just have to hear this ringing and I can't see anything and I'm completely exposed, and for winning that gunfight, now I have to go sit here in this corner here, and so, I mean, that can be changed up with perks. Who knows if they're going to add, like, maybe some sort of a stim shot in the future. We don't know. But right now, health regen seems painfully slow, and the loss of color and the loss of sound is pretty frustrating. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the other cons for the game so far would be the UI. It needs a lot of work, and this is kind of mode specific. My final 2 bits of feedback here are sort of mode specific, but leveling up the guns within Champions Hill is kind of, I don't know. I think I'd prefer people putting their actual attachments on. No, because if you put your actual attachments on, then the game mode's just going to become like super meta, like go only use this attachment, use this, that, or the other thing. But I have found that the optical sights that you get when you level up your guns in this mode are kind of shitty. Like, I don't like them. They actually detract from the experience as compared to like making the game easier for having leveled up your gun. So yeah, some of the optical sights so far are taking a lot to get used to, and it kind of makes me not want to upgrade my gun on certain weapons if I know that it has a really bad optical sight that's tied to it. And another mode specific problem so far is the respawns are a bit cheesy, because sometimes you spawn right on top of somebody, and this is supposed to be a competitive mode with limited lives, and sometimes you spawn right on top of people, or they spawn right on top of you. So that's definitely something that I'm sure they'll be adjusting as we move forward in the alpha. But overall, guys, Call of Duty Vanguard is a pretty fun experience so far. I've had a positive experience with Vanguard. Like I said, there's a number of cons, but there's also a number of pros here, and we're going to have to wait and see how things actually play out with the full multiplayer. Again, we're playing a side mode. We are playing a gimmick mode, essentially. While I do think the gimmick mode is fun, it is what it is. It is a gimmick mode that is not really meant to be the core foundation of the Vanguard multiplayer. We got to learn a lot about the game so far here today and how it's going to play at a fundamental level, but obviously things can change over time. This is day 1 of the alpha. We have many more days of the alpha. Then we have the beta, which is going to go on for like 2 weeks, it seems. And then, of course, the full game is going to be launching in November. And by that time, hopefully, even more changes are going to be made. And we still have to get the full multiplayer reveal yet. So there's a lot to learn. Like, we got a lot of answers today, but even then, we still have a lot more questions for Call of Duty Vanguard. And I would love to know down in the comments, what do you guys think of the game so far? For me, I find it enjoyable. I think I'm going to get bored of it eventually, because we're playing essentially one game mode with a limited number of weapons on a limited number of areas. But so far, it's pretty fun. I'll probably stream it just to, mess around with it and try out all the new guns and stuff like that. But yeah, I'd love to know down in the comments, what do you guys think of Call of Duty Vanguard so far? If you have played it, or if you have watched other people's videos on it, you just like seen gameplay, leave your thoughts and feedback down below. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, consider leaving a like. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful day.